Hello, and welcome to our webinar, The Nuts and Bolts of Rental Property Management. My name is Maria, and I'm working for Zillow Group Rentals. I'll first start off with just a few housekeeping tips. You are in listen-only mode. If you can hear me and see the presentation, you are in the right place. If you have any technical issues at any point during the presentation, please contact the Technical Support Center at 866-678-2846. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the question portion and we'll try to get to them. But since we do have over 1,000 attendees registered today, we will not be able to get to everyone's questions, but we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. So, as usual, our webinar is recorded, so if you can only make it to the first part or just a little bit of it, no worries. We will send you a recording of the webinar later today. We will also have a follow-up article explaining all the wonderful information that is here today and a downloadable checklist for all of the maintenance needs that you need to consider as a landlord. Thanks again to everyone who sent us questions ahead of time. We're going to prioritize those questions as we move through the presentation. I'll introduce Mr. Weinman in a minute, but first I want to say a little bit more about Zillow Group Rentals. So, as many of you know, Zillow Group Rentals encompasses 3 primary consumer brands. That's Zillow, Trulia, and HotPads. As a landlord, when you use Zillow Rental Manager, you create one listing and then it's posted on all 3 sites. Zillow Group has a network of rental sites that's double the size of any other rental network. We have over 7 million qualified renters searching on our sites, and a renter searching across Zillow Group is most likely to have a credit score in the 600 to 700 range, is ready to move within a month or sooner, and usually provides enough information up front for landlords to determine next steps. Also, don't forget, you can check out our Rental Resource Center, and a link will be sent to you after this presentation, leading you to this center. It's an invaluable resource to landlords and property managers that includes articles, downloadable checklists, and other useful information, whether you're a brand new landlord or you've been doing this for years. In addition, we have dozens of customizable tools and forms that will make renting your unit a breeze. If you haven't heard, you can also now add tour availability to your rental listing. Simply open your listing on Zillow Rental Manager, go to the left-hand column and select Tours, and then you can pick the days and times which you are free to show your rental. When renters are searching, they'll then see the availability and they'll be able to pick a time that fits within their schedule as well as yours. You'll be able to confirm with the renter once they select a time frame, but it helps cut down on the back and forth, making your life so much easier. And don't forget, as always, we still have our rental video walkthrough within the Zillow Rental Manager app, available on Android and iPhone. You can always let prospective tenants envision themselves in your place before they contact you, cutting down on so many questions so they're not wasting your time and you're not wasting theirs. Remember, this app is for 50 units or less, and so is Zillow Rental Manager. Once again, this webinar is being recorded, and now I'll introduce our presenter today. Mr. Steven Weinman is an experienced landlord and real estate professional who's been in the industry for over 30 years. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. We're really excited to have you here, Steve.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be your presenter today. Lots of experience as a landlord, a real estate broker, and very involved in the Rental Housing Association of Washington as one of their instructors as well. So today we're going to be looking at property maintenance and how that affects property owners, which something we all have to deal with is taking care of our assets. So in our objectives today, we're going to learn about building resources to manage your repairs and maintenance, know when to do things yourself or hire a handyman or if you need a contractor. Number 2 is to plan and execute effective preventative maintenance routines. And number 3 is to establish and implement appropriate standards for your rental property so that you have some kind of minimum guideline as to how you keep your properties both, we'll call them healthy and profitable. So your role as a landlord. As a landlord, you have the responsibility to make sure your home that you provide, whether it's an apartment or a single-family home, that it's safe and habitable at all times. Almost every state has some regulation that would state that there's a minimum standard that landlords must keep their property. In addition to upkeep and maintenance, dealing with keeping it weather tight and secure, there's also all of the different systems in the property as a landlord, and we need to keep those in good repair and respond to repair requests when tenants contact us. Sometimes we set up routine maintenance schedules, things that we want to just do on a regular basis to ensure that our properties are being well maintained. And then the third thing is to keep track of what are our tenants doing. Are they doing their part at maintaining the property? We find that there's two important roles of every tenant. One is to pay the rent as agreed, and the second is to take care of our property. And even if they are having issues in paying, maintaining the property should never be let to slack. We definitely need to stay on top of our tenants. And when we allow them to slide on things, we are setting up the stage for disaster down the road, where either a major failure is going to take place or major expense is going to take place in trying to restore the property back to a good living condition. So these are your roles as a landlord. When we enter a property, we need to have given proper notice. Now on the screen today, you'll see it says a 2-day notice for repairs and maintenance, 1-day notice to show a property, and no notice is required in case of emergency. Now these are the standards that are set forth in the Washington State Landlord-Tenant Law. You need to check with your own jurisdiction to see if the time frames are the same or if they're different. However, when we issue a notice for entering our property, we need to usually do that in writing. Most states don't allow for emails and texts or even phone calls. We send a letter, or typically if it's a short notice, it needs to get posted on the door of the property because there's no time to allow for mailing if it's only a 1 or 2-day type notice. And it needs to state the date and the time that you're planning to enter the property, and to give a contact information on that notice so that people know who to call, who's coming, and if they need to reschedule for any reason. One thing that's important in contacting our tenants and giving notice, we don't want to just enter a tenant's unit without their authorization. So if the tenant has given you permission to enter the property to perform maintenance or do an inspection or do whatever, it's important that you have that in writing and documented from them, that you have your bases covered as the landlord or the maintenance staff. And typically, as a landlord, we shouldn't be giving out keys to vacant or to occupied units. I'm sorry, don't give out keys to occupied units. Again, without the tenant giving permission for that. Because if something should happen or they report something missing, you don't want to be on the hook that you gave access to their property without them knowing about it and knowing who's coming. So make sure that you check again with your own jurisdiction to find out what the time frames are when you give notice to get permission to enter the property. The other thing on permission to enter is typically tenants don't get the option to withhold permission, but if you've given proper notice, you have the legal authorization to enter with or without them being present. So when we look at who should be doing your repair work, we kind of call this a repair triage almost. is it something that's really easy to do? This is something that many landlords like to do their own work. Maybe it's, patching a hole or changing a washer and a faucet, or maybe even changing out an electrical switch or something it's not difficult to do, and it's not really high risk if you do it properly and you exercise the proper cautions. Working on electrical, that you turn off the power first before you get inside and start changing things out. If it's not something that you know how to do, but it's still fairly easy and low risk, you might make that a level 2 item here. It require a little more technical ability than I can handle myself. That would be your handyman. That's where you look in your local want ads or Craigslist and find people that like to do work on other people's property as a handyman. We call them jack of all trades and expert at none, because they aren't specialists, but they are people that can usually handle a lot of the maintenance needs in most rental property. Leaky faucets, running toilets, light fixture that's not working, some of those kinds of things. When you get to level 3, these are things that are a little more complex, or even a lot more complex, like the sewer line isn't draining. We've got sewage backing up, and we need someone that's an expert in the field and has the proper equipment to go out and service the property. And if they can't get it clear, then they can camera the line. And if they find a fault in the line, they can replace the line or use a lining service and come out and reline your sewer line. Those are all specialty items. An electrician, a license, things that require a permit, all fall under level 3. Anything that needs a licensed contractor to actually take care of the repairs. Again, that's jurisdictional. It changes by area. For an example, here in Washington, and where I am in Tacoma, Washington, if the tenant reports a broken window, we can replace the glass by ourselves. Doesn't require any special tools or anything. If you know how to replace wood sash windows, great. If it's a fancier aluminum or vinyl window, you might have to contact a specialist. But if you want to replace the whole window and like take out the whole frame and put in a new one, and it's really not difficult to do, but here that requires a building permit with the city. So you need to know what the rules and regs are in your area, so that you're not one, violating the law, but you're also responding to the tenant's needs. As a landlord, I recommend everyone has a vendor list, where you have a list of all the different resources that you might need. And on your screen, you'll find a list of suggested ones that you should have this list with you everywhere you go, in your cell phone or on a 3x5 card in your pocket or someplace. See, managing rental property can be done if we have good vendors and good resources. We could be sitting on the beach in Hawaii, and when the tenant calls and says, hey, I have a problem, we don't panic. We just go to our vendor list. We find who is the right category. Does it need a handyman? Does it need a roofer? Is it a heating issue? Whatever it is, we can contact the appropriate vendor from our cell phone, make some notes in our email or something to ourselves for our records, and then we can go right back to being on vacation. And things can get handled in a professional and swift manner without having to have a lot of stress and a lot of worry. The problem that most landlords have is they don't think about who's going to clean my sewer line until it's too late. And now we have a problem, and now it's an emergency, and we have to deal with it right now. If we arrange things in advance with vendors, we can have things set up where they'll bill us. We don't have to show up with our credit card or give our credit card over the phone to get work done. And they know who we are, we know who they are, and oftentimes, especially with roofers and winter storms, if you're a regular customer, you're going to get service first and you're going to get taken care of without having to, wait 2 weeks for someone to show up. So set up your vendor list, put it in your phone. I tag mine either by what their specialty is under the company name, but sometimes the company name doesn't tell you much. So like I use a vendor, their name is Spartan. Doesn't tell you what they do very well, so it says Spartan, and then the next to it, where I can search in my phone, it says sewer and drain cleaning. Now I know exactly what they do, so I can type in sewer in my search, and it will bring up the 1 or 2 vendors that I typically use for that service. Should we get bids or not? That's always a good question. When a job is not an emergency and it's being done more in preventative mode opposed to responding to an actual problem, we have time to get bids. Things that we typically get bids for are maybe exterior painting, roof replacement, major upgrades. Maybe we want to renovate a kitchen, or we want to redo a bathroom or something like that. We'd get bids for those kinds of things, so we can know what the costs are up front, and we can specify exactly what we want, and then we have time to collect data on the different vendors that are out there. And this is a good time to even find new vendors, because you send out requests to several different vendors to get a bid to replace your roof. You'll find which ones are responsive and which ones are not. When you're going to get bids, it's real important to put together a list of your specifications for the job. You want to be able to compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges. Yes, they're all fruit, but I've had roof bids come in from $4,000 to $10,000 to do the exact same work. And it's important to become what I call the armchair expert on what you want done before it's done. So if you're thinking about roof replacement, you need to be aware of the different types of roofing that are available in your region. Composition, shake, aluminum, or metal roofing. What are the options, and what are the life spans of each one? What are the cost differences in materials? And that way, when we put out a specification and we say, I want a 25-year composition, architectural shingles, I want completely stripped and new tar paper and replace any damaged wood, and we do all those things up front. When we get the bids, they should all be somewhat comparable in what the job specs are. Now, everyone that goes up on the roof and looks says, well, you're going to need this, you're going to need that, and you might need to revise your specs once you get a report or two back saying, well, you got a real bad soft spot, you're going to have to replace plywood or something, and you can revise your bid specs to the other vendors. Once you have your bids received, and typically I put out like 10 requests for bids and I might get 3 back, you can compare costs and you can compare reviews online of the vendors, and which ones have a better rating and which ones are the ones that if you have a problem you won't hear from again. So it gives you time to do all of these things while you're getting the bid process. And that's part of comparing the quality, is looking at online reviews. What do other people say? Ask for references. Ask so you can contact people or go by and look at jobs they've done to see if it's something that meets your approval. And then you get the work done when it's not an emergency. You find that getting a roof done in the middle of the summer typically is cheaper than getting it done when you got snow and rain and ice and everything else in the wintertime. One, it's easier to work, and 2, there's not 500 people that need roof repairs calling on the same day. And you find that contractors will bid according to how busy they are. So planning ahead will allow you to save money and probably get a better quality job and not be a rush job. When it comes to record keeping, we need to know what has happened on our property. So starting on the personal record side of things on the left of your screen, it says ongoing maintenance. Keep a file by property. What's been done? When has it been done? Keep your receipts for tax records so you know what you spent. You know, there are some things that are routine repairs, fixing things that count as repairs. There are other things that count more as upgrades that get amortized out over time on our tax return. So by keeping the receipts and keeping good records, we can separate those things by each property and make our tax preparation at, next April much easier. The other records we want to also keep when it comes to maintenance deal with the age or dates and times when we put new assets in, when we replace the carpet, when we put new paint on. How old is the toilet? How old are the new closet doors? When did you put each of these things in your property? The lifespan of a property, there's lots of websites that give you estimates of things. Interior paint might have an 18-month life, where exterior paint might have a 10-year life. Your roof might be a 20 or a 25-year life. By understanding what the lifespan of your assets are, it helps you determine in advance how to budget. If we know that the roof is 15 years old, sometime probably in the next 5 years, I'm probably going to have to spend money on a new roof. And we don't want it to become an emergency that we haven't planned for. We can budget ahead and know that it's coming. It makes it that much easier to be a landlord. Also, when a tenant vacates your property, we need to know the age of the asset. I'll use carpeting, for example. Typical FHA carpet, the minimum carpet that you can buy for your rental, may have a lifespan of, say, 5 to 7 years. Tenant moves in, the carpet is clean, but it's not new. It's probably, according to your records, maybe was installed 5 years ago. But it's still in pretty good shape, and you rent the house out without replacing the carpet, just getting it cleaned. Tenants there 3 or 4 years now, they move out. Now the carpet is trashed. It's old. Looks bad. Well, how much would we charge that tenant when they moved out for that carpeting? The law pretty much requires us to only charge tenants for the loss use of remaining life. So if the carpet was 5 years old at move-in and 4 years later the tenant moves out, now it's 9 years old carpeting, and your lifespan of the carpet is, say, 7 years, you're probably not going to charge the tenant at all because there's no remaining life. It's served well beyond its life. But on the other side, you put that carpet in when the tenant moves in and it's brand new at move-in, and you document that, and they move out a year later and there's pet damage or there's stains or there's a bleach stain in the middle of the living room, whatever. Now you can say, well, according to my records, that carpet was 1 year old when you moved out, and it has we'll use 5-year life for that carpet, so I can charge that tenant for 80% of the lost remaining life of the carpet. So that's all based on how good your records are, because if the tenant challenges you, you want to be able to have the records if you end up in a courtroom to show this is an average life, and this is from my records when the asset was replaced or installed. On the tenant side, we should keep track of any communications that we have with the tenant. Anytime they request a repair, we should document it. We should document what we've done as far as responding to that request. And then we keep a file by the tenant or by the house so that we know what was done and that we responded appropriately. Something that's very important to check in your jurisdiction is the time frame to complete repairs or to begin repairs. Here in Washington State, when it comes to a tenant requested repair, certain items you have to start repair within 24 hours. That's usually there's no water, there's no heat, those kinds of major things. There's another list in our state law that says we have to start within 2 days or 48 hours, and those are things that say if there's no hot water, or opposed to no water at all, no hot water, or an appliance is not functioning, or other things that are security related fall under the 2-day rule. And then typically anything else that is requested that be repaired that is the landlord's responsibility, Washington State says we have 10 days to begin repair. So be aware of what the law is in your area. Also find out how the tenant needs to notify you. Again, I'm relying on Washington law for this seminar because that's where I am. In Washington, the tenant can put their request for repairs in writing, and they send it to the address where they pay their rent. Well, if they pay their rent to a P.O. box and you don't check your P.O. box after the rents come in, you could have a notice for repair sitting there going unanswered for weeks. You also, the same scenario, you could have that notice to vacate sitting there for weeks, and you find out that they moved out when you go to look for the rent, and they find a notice that was dated 3 weeks ago in your mail. So using a P.O. box is only good if you're going to check that on a fairly regular basis, like every day or every other day. And we'll hear what those timelines that I mentioned a few moments ago begin when the tenant has given you written notice of the problem. So if they give you written notice and it's a day after mailing, if it's mailed to you, that becomes day 0, and then you have the appropriate number of days to begin those repairs. If your state has a Landlord-Tenant Act that's patterned anywhere like any of those on the West Coast, you'll find that if you don't respond, the tenant is allowed to get bids, and the tenant is also then allowed at some point to commence repairs on their own and deduct it from your rent. So we need to be aware of what the law is in our jurisdiction so that we aren't paying a higher cost for maintenance. That vendor list, referring back to my vendor, I have a set price for doing certain items. So when I call for a sewer line to be cleared, I know exactly what the bill should be when the bill comes. If the tenant calls Roto-Rooter or some other national company to come out and do the work, the bill could be twice as high as what my agreed prices with my vendor are. So it's important to be responsive and be involved with our property maintenance. Let's talk a little bit about seasonal maintenance. This is where we're going to talk more about things that are preventative. Things in the springtime. It's a good time in the spring, and we'll talk about that first because it's past for this year, but it's a good time to, make sure that our lighting's working, make sure that our sprinkler systems are functioning, make sure that our fences are in good condition. It's a good time to kind of just do a good walk around of the whole property, because this is the time of year that a lot of times, like again, is cheaper in the summer. So let's start looking in the spring. Are we going to need to replace the roof in the next year? Now's the time to start that in the springtime instead of waiting until it fails. In the fall, we start getting ready for winter. If you're in an area that gets a lot of snow, you might want to deal with snow removal. I see there's a question on the screen that talked about snow removal companies. I think it's better to pay as you go, but have a vendor that you can trust that will send you a bill when you say, hey, I need some help, I need you to go clear the snow. That's mainly in multifamily that you're dealing with that. But it's better to set that up on a vendor basis, because what if you have a good dry year and you don't need them, and you've then paid money that you don't need? So that's something that you might want to evaluate. Other things in the fall, a lot of water companies base sewer rates based on water consumption that's in the wintertime, because that's when you're not watering the grass and washing the car and the kids aren't in the sprinkler as much. So in the wintertime, a lot of companies say this is the water that's going down the drain. And that's what they base the whole next year's sewer bill based on a water consumption during the wintertime billing cycle. If you as the owner are paying for the utilities on your building, this is the time that you want to check for water leaks, the running toilets, the leaky faucets, maybe a dripping spigot on the outside. Any of these things need to be dealt with to avoid those bills being higher next year. Another important thing to look at as fall and getting ready for winter is winterizing things. Maybe having sprinkler systems shut off and the pipes blown out, disconnecting yard hoses, covering up water spigots with insulation, making sure windows are sealed properly and aren't leaking, caulking around windows and window frames. This is the time to check those types of things. So as we're thinking about, seasonal maintenance, think about what's coming up, and of course if you're in Hawaii, you're probably not going to deal much with snow, but you might have a rainy season, the monsoon season to deal with. So just look at your own area and figure out, which things need to be done. On regular routine maintenance, a lot of these things come from doing inspections of a rental property. Now, I've talked to some owners and they say, well, the tenant moved in and I've never been there. They pay the rent and that's it. Well, as an owner, we are responsible for the condition of the property, not the tenant. Not only should we be looking for preventative maintenance for things that can cause us a bigger expense, we also at this time look at tenant compliance. So we should set up inspections. I typically inspect every unit, or one of my staff members does, every 6 months. It's just on the calendar. If we have because we have more than one unit that we manage, we just set up a calendar at the beginning of the month that says these are the addresses that need to be inspected during this month. And we send out notices and we go out and do them all. We typically send out a letter a week or two ahead and give the tenants a chance to reschedule, so it's trying to be as least obtrusive to the tenant as possible. However, here in Washington, it's a 2-day legal notice, so if there's a suspicion of a problem or a report of an issue, we can just post the notice and get in there much quicker. There are checklist forms and things available, and I understand that'll be part of information that Zillow will send to you later. But when you're inspecting property, you should have a checklist that you follow, that you can kind of look at everything in some kind of orderly fashion and keep a record of when you were there and what you noticed. We look for fire hazards during routine inspections, or things piled up on baseboard heaters, or the vents cleaned out, or the filters been replaced on furnaces. We look for clear path to things like the hot water tank, the furnace, the electrical panels, gas meters, water shutoffs, anything that tenant might need access to in an emergency. We want to make sure there's not, 2 years worth of debris and boxes piled up in front of it. You would have to spend an hour moving before you could get to the panel or shutoff that you need to. And we recommend taking lots and lots of pictures. When we move a tenant in, I typically take 400 plus pictures of a rental, documenting anything and everything that we write down on a written checklist. We take a picture of, so there's a record. During routine inspections, we take pictures of tenant violations as well as repair items. The violations, by having pictures, makes it easy to send a picture to the tenant, just like our city does when they find something on our property they don't like. We send the tenant a letter saying, please take care of this, and there's a little picture and they know exactly what you're talking about, and this kind of eliminates the question about what are you talking about. By taking pictures of any maintenance that needs to be done, it allows me as a landlord to sit down with my maintenance handyman or staff and say, this is what I saw while I was there, so they can be prepared to fix it when they go out and not be going in blind. So I can share pictures of damages or repairs that need to be taken care of with my repair staff before they actually show up at the property. But take lots of pictures and lots of notes. And then at move out, we go through and we take lots more pictures. And when we do those pictures, we can put them up side by side to the move-in pictures that we have and be able to determine what the condition was at move out, and what might be tenant damage, and what might be normal wear and tear. And those are all important when we go to the tenant move-out process. And I'm sure we'll have another seminar that covers that in the future. But don't be afraid to inspect your properties. We're not there to, harass the tenant, but it is your asset. And, one of the things I mentioned in a class that I taught earlier this week is, would you give a stranger the keys to your car? And no matter how nice or how junky someone's car is, they are usually pretty protective of their car. Our rental properties are worth way more than a vehicle, and a lot of owners don't take the proper precautions to protect their assets from the public. So your tenant has moved out, excuse me, and now we call this a turnover. This is the time between one tenant and another. Again, you've done your inspection, you figured out, made a work list maybe of things that need to be taken care of. We want to make things are in good repair when someone moves in, because it's a lot easier to expect the next tenant to take care of things if they're good and in a wonderful condition when they move in. If it's dirty or trashy or damaged when they move in, then they expect that's the standard you're going to keep, and then they will be as careless with your property as maybe the last tenant was. Do you need to paint? Do you need to clean? Are there repairs and maintenance that need to be done? This is, go and exercise all the valves on your property. We do this typically at each inspection, is make sure the shutoff valves are working and those types of things. Make sure things shine. Don't, if it needs to be painted, paint it. If you need to paint a wall, paint a whole wall. Spot painting usually turns out looking pretty ugly, like measles, when you have paint that's different ages on the same wall, even if it was out of the same bucket, because they fade and things differently in the sunshine. So typically if we need to paint, we'll paint a wall or we'll paint a whole room. We use a standard color on all of our rentals because it's easier that if you have more than one unit that to have a standard paint, so you can get away with painting a wall and not have to find matching paint or do other things. You want everything to be perfectly clean, light shades, sinks. You might want to run snakes through the drains to make sure the drains are flowing properly. If you don't want to actually take off the traps and actually clean them, these are all things that you would do in a standard turnover and follow a list of things. Here in Washington, we have to make sure that we have working smoke detectors and working carbon monoxide detectors in each area of the property. Time to make sure that those are in good condition and then they test properly and they aren't damaged, and maybe it's time to invest in a new one. Hot water tanks, again in Washington, have to set them 120 degrees. That's required by state law. If the tenant's changed it, we need to have some record that we've evaluated, looked at the hot water tank, made sure it was set at a safe temperature for the next tenant. So follow a standard turnover, and it'll make it a lot simpler as you move on. Major repairs and replacements, these are things that you said, but your records will help you determine budgeting by knowing how old they are. Things will fail sometimes earlier than expected. But when we plan for major things, it makes it a lot easier. The other thing that a lot of landlords will do is that will establish an equity line of credit, maybe not on every property, but on one property that has some room. So if they do have a major expense, that they have a source of funds available that they can tap into really quickly and not have to start scrambling to figure out how they're going to pay for a new furnace or a new roof or something like that. The other thing, we can take advantage of things. Coming up pretty soon is, Black Friday and Thanksgiving Day sales. Last year we were able to buy 3 or 4 refrigerators and 3 or 4 stoves that were on a great discount on that one-day sale. And I had a place we could store them, so we bought several and put them in storage so that as we could use them throughout, the year or into the future. but I was able to pay a much lower price by buying them when they were on sale instead of having to buy it on a day of failure. So plan ahead and be able to control these types of things. Then we can look at upgrades. What does the market conditions allow and what do the tenants expect? In a good hot rental market, you may not have to do as many upgrades to get your unit re-rented. But if you want to get to the top end of the market on rent value, it might be a good time to upgrade the old light fixtures into something more modern. Maybe upgrade the paint into something and get rid of old wallpaper. There might be things that are cost effective to do because if you make it shine, it's going to rent faster. They'll have a shorter vacancy time and also demand a higher rent value. So shop your neighborhood and know what your neighbors are doing, and that allows you to say, okay, I want my house to look better. I want my apartments to shine above the competition, and when I want to charge an extra $50 a month rent more than the neighbor, it shows. When people come and look at your place, they desire to be there because of upgrading. Now, something to consider when in upgrading is not to go overboard. It's easy to get upsell salesmen when you get to like the carpet store and they say, well, you can buy this carpet here and it has a life of 10 years instead of a life of 5 years. Okay, but if it costs me twice as much to put in the more expensive carpeting, it's not going to prevent a tenant from damaging it, and I still have to replace it before the 10 years is up. So that's something to consider. The other thing to consider is, what are the chances of recovery if I'm going to be able to charge the tenant 5 years from now 50% of that expensive carpeting because it's a 10-year life carpet? And are you going to be able to even collect that, or are you just going to have to eat the expense? The other way I look at it is, if I put in 5-year carpeting, in 5 years from now I can do it again, and I can advertise I have new carpet again instead of having an older color, older style. Things starting to age when they're, it's only half the life. So think about when you're upgrading, is it going to affect the value of the property? Maybe you're thinking of selling your property. That might be a time to do a few extra things, to stand above, because you go on the market and you see what's out there and, they have nicer appliances or nicer counters or newer floors. That might be time to do some of those upgrades. Things to look at on the inside and upgrades: lighting, painting color, flooring, countertops, cabinetry. You can probably think of other things. One of the things we typically upgrade is the faucets. Maybe the sinks. Go to a stainless steel sink, buy a new faucet and put it in. Makes it look nice, it's clean, and you'll find like things that Costco sells kitchen faucets for less than $100 that are a lot nicer than some of the ones you'll find at your hardware store. So you can shop around and look for these things and be able to upgrade your property appropriately. Outside, on the exterior, is the paint in good condition? Peeling paint, flaky paint, scaling paint turns people off. If you're have an older home built before 1978, it could have lead-based paint underneath existing paint, and any peeling paint becomes a sign that there might be a problem on an older building. But if you keep the paint in good condition, you'll avoid having to, maybe have lead inspections and verify that your house is certified to be lead paint free. What's the condition of the siding? Exterior lighting, make sure it's bright and light, especially in the wintertime, that every light is working and there's good lights if you have a multifamily for walkways and parking lots, and that is safe for your occupants. Check walkways and driveways for cracks. Repair any damaged concrete. Those are times to, things that you can look for during your inspections. Is your landscaping up to par, or is it all overgrown, or is it dead? Get rid of dead stuff, trim back stuff that's overgrown. Make sure that it's, again, a safe environment so you don't have plants and shrubs and bushes blocking doorways and access and windows so people can't, could hide in there. It makes it a safer environment for your tenant. So now we're going to spend just a few minutes left on question and answer time. Let me answer a couple of the questions that came in up front, and then if you have additional ones, we'll go through those. Someone asked about budgeting for repairs. How much of a percentage of rent would you budget for repairs? And my answer, that really depends on your building. I can't give you a number. I would say 25% might be a good place to start. A newer building, a newer home, it might be far less than that. An older building, it could be more. I mean, if you have a property that's, aging and has a 15-year-old furnace and a, 18-year-old roof, you may have some significant expenses coming up, and you might need to set aside more money towards on a budget for an older property that hasn't been upgraded recently. I think I covered about licensing to do work. Your jurisdiction will control if you need permits or not. If you're doing work on your own property, you can do whatever you're capable of, short of things that require permits and licenses like electrical and plumbing. But if you're ever doing work on somebody else's property, say you're managing a property for a third party, that requires a general contractor to be the one doing the work. Getting a contractor's license is fairly easy in most jurisdictions, so you might be able to become a contractor opposed to hiring a contractor. But make sure that you're covered for liability and insurance and bonds and things that are necessary. And if you're working with people that are licensed contractors, make sure that you check with your state to find out that their insurance is up to date, they don't have any claims against their bond. Those things are usually available through websites or some other public information service to know that you're dealing with a reputable company. Mentioned a little bit already in the seminar about the timelines for things. Jurisdictions will control whether on repairs, 1 day, 2 day, 10 days like it is here. And we talked about the life of property and, carpet 5 years. I use interior paint 18 months. Hardware like faucets and closet doors and things like that, I usually go, 7 to 10 years, things like that. And we can talk more about that. If you send in a question, we could probably post a list at some point of what that would be. Someone asked about seeing around the corners. How do you, what's your crystal ball? How do you look into the future and know what you're going to need? The number one thing is inspection. If you go through a property and you can look and see that you have a furnace and it was installed, in 1980, so you're coming up on 90, 2017, you're 37 years on that furnace, it's probably going to be due really, really soon for replacement. Even with regular maintenance, the parts only last so long, and when things fail, parts become unavailable or extremely expensive to get. So I would say the best way to look into the future is to have a good knowledge of your property. And if you're not an expert and you can't figure out some of these things, find a friend or someone or a handyman that you can hire for an hour to do your inspection with you. They can kind of walk through and give you an idea of things that, might be telltale signs of other problems. Mold is another big question that people ask about a lot. One who's responsible. Well, again, it depends, but typically it's a landlord. If the tenant has done something to contribute to it being a moldy environment, then you might be able to bill the tenant for that. Someone that their lifestyle uses a lot of steamed foods and things like that might, need some education on that the landlord can educate them and say, I understand your lifestyle, but I suggest that you use a fan, or maybe the landlord installs a fan if there isn't a ventilation fan, or they show them how to, to open windows for ventilation, and maybe even use a window fan to draw the moisture out of the building if it's something the tenant's causing. Things like bathroom mold is very common in lots of areas, and we've installed fans. We've sometimes wired them so they come on when the light comes on, so they can't avoid using the fan. And in other places, we put a timer on the fan so that they can turn it on, and it'll stay on for 30 or 60 minutes and then shut itself off. But it stays on for a little while after they shower and bathe, so that to eliminate some of the moisture out of the building. Sometimes mold is just a nature of a bad installation. I had one building that mold was created in the walls from the windows being installed improperly. They weren't properly sealed, and they had trim that wasn't up to code, where water was wicking in and getting between the siding and the sheetrock and saturating the insulation, and it caused mold on the inside. And we ended up having to strip that all out and reseal everything and put it back together, and have the windows redone properly to avoid the problem from recurring. And again, obviously the tenant had nothing to do with those problems. Those were installation problems and changes in building code over time that said there's a better way to do this now than we had before. Let's see, somebody asked about HVAC inspections. I don't spend a lot of time doing checks other than making sure they change the filters. I certainly don't pay a contractor to go out on a regular basis until the tenant calls and says they have a problem. But before that, is during the inspection, as to if you don't check it yourself, have you at least inquired of the tenant to say, have you replaced the furnace filter? And if they say no, maybe it's worth you going to the store and buying a few so that they have them. Question about in D.C. and Virginia is required to shampoo carpeting if it's not specified in the lease, and the answer is I have no clue. Not familiar with any regulations about shampooing carpeting, at least on the Washington state side, and many rental agreements here specify the tenant must have it professionally cleaned before they vacate, so that's something to consider.
Steve,
this question is how many? Yeah.
We had another question that came in a few times of, what if tenants won't let you in? What do you do? How do you navigate that?
Well, typically, if a tenant denies access, like for inspections or for getting maintenance done, one, document it so you have a record. Make sure you're complying with the law on the proper notices. In Washington State, there's a $100 penalty we can assess if a tenant refuses access. And in the end, we typically just evict the tenant and get rid of them and go to somebody we can do business with.
Great. Thank you so much. And it looks like we have time for one more question. So when you're doing repairs, do you recommend having a separate bank account set aside for repairs, or just having it all together with how else you manage your rental funds?
I've seen owners do it both ways. Most owners have a bank account that they put all the rents in and pay their bills out of, because there's really no way to know how much you're going to need. But a lot of owners that are planning for bigger expenses, just so that they don't spend the money on other things or think it's extra money for, as profit, will transfer a set amount of money each month to a savings type of account for a slush fund or backup fund, that when they need to buy that new hot water tank or the new furnace or the new roof, that they have money saved in advance to go towards that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for presenting today, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. We're going to end the webinar in just a minute, And if you're still on, we would love it if you took the survey after we end the webinar. Let Mr. Weinman know how he did and give us some feedback for what you'd like to see next time. Thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you at future Zillow webinars. Have an excellent day.
Before you end real quick, I just want to encourage landlords to get involved in local rental housing associations, because they have great resources for landlords, usually with answering questions, using proper forms. They can be a great benefit in your location.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.